Alright, welcome back to more Night of the Twisters. We're going to look at the midnight hour. First, let's review the 11 o'clock hour. This is when they had left, Dan, Arthur, and Stacy had left Mrs. Smiley, and she went on the bus back to Kmart. There wasn't enough room there, so whoever was left over piled into the backs of cop cars. So Dan, Arthur, and Stacy piled into the back of a cop car. The cop, whose name we later learned was Officer Kelly, and he was driving them back. They couldn't see anything. There was debris everywhere. And then all of a sudden, they were in another tornado. And it turned the car around. It, jostled it, made it move all around and everything around it. The windows were blown out of the cop car. So was the windshield. And Officer Kelly's glasses were blown out. And then after the tornado left, Dan realized that he was, driving like this, like really, really close, and that he couldn't see. So Dan has had some experience driving on the farm between, Dad's car and the tractor. And so he had some experience. So between his driving and Arthur and Stacy kind of knowing where to go, they were able to make it back to the police station. So there they are, midnight hour. Here we go. We walked into the police station through double glass doors into a big open space the size of a classroom. Officer Kelly, his hands on my shoulder and Arthur's, steered us left toward a sign that said Sheriff's Department. I could tell by his grip he couldn't see worth a darn anymore. When the policewoman behind the counter looked up and saw him, she practically threw her phone down on the desk. Kelly, oh my goodness, Angie, get a deputy out here. In that glaring overhead light, he looked pretty terrible. Cuts were showing up all over his face, red lines dotted with pinpoints of blood, and his eyes behind the empty frames had watered clean down to his cheeks. I've taken some glass in my eyes, he said calmly. Could someone please tend to these kids? In 2 seconds, a deputy was around from behind the counter, taking Kelly's arm. Someone else rushed out of the office. Suddenly, we were surrounded by cops. How bad is it? Can you see? He tossed his car keys onto the counter. I can't see much. Angie, let the hospital know we're coming. Someone took off his glasses. We stepped aside to let the other officers around him. You maniac, we heard the deputy say as he started off with Kelly. Out there chasing those tornadoes. We watched as they hustled him through an inside door. I felt a little silly waving at his back when he couldn't see me, but I did it anyway. It was awful not being able to tell him thanks or goodbye. Even after Kelly left, the place was a zoo. Phones were ringing nonstop. From somewhere in the background, we could hear the massive congestion on a police radio piling up messages. Cops and people in regular clothes were in and out of the offices, shouting at each other, and everyone hyper. Finally, the same policewoman who had helped Kelly came to see where we were standing at the long counter. So, you kids need shelter, she said. I needed to find out if my dad was alive. That's what I needed. Kelly said you were separated from 2 sets of parents, is that right? We nodded. Hold on. She went back to her desk and got on the intercom with someone. Mildred, is there room in that women's section? Yes, I have 3 teenagers here. I straightened, being mistaken for a teenager. She called someone else on the intercom, after which this heavy-set man in a tan work clothes came out and glowered at us. I looked down at myself and then at Arthur. We were really a sight. My jeans were filthy, torn at both legs. Quickly, I wiped my face on the bottom of my shirt. Stacy didn't look much better in her oversized Levi's jacket and faded cutoffs. He'll take you upstairs, the police lady said. Upstairs? What for? Can you tell me something first? I heard myself ask. Did Phillips get hit by a tornado? I wouldn't know. One was sighted near Hanson, I guess. People are spotting tornadoes everywhere on a night like this. We've been in 2 of them, Arthur told her. Is that all? She said sarcastically. There have been dozens. I felt like screaming at her. I knew she was upset, but she was making me feel exactly like a prisoner. Don't 12-year-old kids have rights? I wanted to ask about Me's bull too, but I lost my nerve. On our way up the stairs, the jailer, or whatever he was, said he was taking us to the women's section, since there aren't any female prisoners tonight. He led us into a carpeted room with very plain walls. There were 2 couches and some chairs, a table full of magazines. A policewoman was sitting on the arm of a chair, talking to some people and writing stuff down on a clipboard. The jailer pointed to a narrow open bedroom jutting off the main room. You kids can have that unit, he said. 2 identical bedrooms on the other side were already occupied. I could hear a baby fussing over there, which made me think of Mom and Ryan more now than ever. The woman in the brown uniform looked up and smiled. I'm Mrs. Minetti, the matron here, she said. I'll be right with you. Are we in jail? I whispered to Stacy after the man left. The women's section. That's what he said. It was pretty nice if you ask me. I couldn't see bars anywhere. The three of us sat down on a couch opposite the matron and stared at the other disaster victims, who were all wet and stringy haired just like us. A white-faced girl about Ronnie Bay's age stared back. She had a bandage on her arm. Two smaller kids were barefoot and shivering, wearing PJs that stuck to their skin. Their mother wore a mud-splattered bathrobe minus the belt. We thought the storm had blown over, this lady was telling the matron, but when Dave went outside to see if things were letting up, it knocked him flat on his face. He crawled back to the trailer. God in heaven, when it hit, she couldn't even finish. Our trailer was one of those big double jobs, her husband went on, but that tornado flipped us over like a cardboard box, dragged us 30 feet. His hand shook so bad he was hardly getting a drag on his cigarette. When did you start to smell the gas? Mrs. Minetti asked. Right after. It was terrible, overpowering. All up and down Sycamore? Through the women's section was plenty warm. I found myself with chills on my arms. It was the gas that got us out too, the other lady said, jousting the baby on her shoulder as she came out of the bedroom unit. The little boy who clung to her jeans pockets studied us with huge, uncertain eyes. When the adults started talking to each other, we learned that the second family had lost their house in Capitol Heights and been brought in just ahead of us by the deputy sheriff. Everything is gone, a man said, shaking his head. Then sadly, even the dog, yeah. And we happened to see her. He shouldn't have mentioned the dog because then it set his older kid crying. The father lifted his big boy and held him close to muffle the sobs. The dad wanted to cry too, I could tell. I had to look away. I never wanted to see Minerva dead. A little later, Mrs. Minetti took us into the room with two cots where she asked our names and what happened. She gave us a scratchy army blanket too, just in case. I liked her. She had brown hair like Mom's and friendly eyes. I was glad she was in charge and not that other policewoman. There was plainly nothing else to be glad about, getting stuck in a jail, not knowing if my dad was dead or alive. When Arthur went off to the John, Stacy and I sat there on the two cots and just looked at each other. I was so tired, I just wanted to fall over and go to sleep. Then Stacy smiled, which made me smile because her face was all crooked on one side from the swelling. Are you okay, Dan? Yeah. She bounced a little on the striped mattress, which was covered with plastic, testing it, I guess. Ever think you'd end up in jail, she asked. She stood and tried to look out the window. How come they put us in here? I blurted out suddenly. How are we going to know what's happening? I couldn't get down off my mind. What if he drove straight into that tornado on South Locust? We always came home from Phillips that way. Stacy didn't answer, but when she sat down again, it was right next to me. I was hoping she'd put her arm around me the way she'd done earlier, but she didn't. She was too busy picking dried blood off of her leg. Think of it this way, Dan. Would you rather sleep here where it's nice and warm or on the floor at Kmart? Kmart, I said without batting an eye. Okay, Stacy sighed as she took off her dad's jacket. When I pointed out that one sleeve of her blouse was ripped, she finished it off and then slipped the cuff end over her head. She rolled up the other sleeve to match. I had to laugh when she told me uneven sleeves were going to be in the new style in Grand Island. Stacy took her turn on the John next. Arthur and I pulled a bed to the window and climbed up, calling each other jailbird and juvenile offender, trading elbow digs as we tried to see out. The sky overhead was black as ever, though all the rain had let up. There were no city lights at all. Only the parking areas around the Public Safety Center were ablaze. They have their own generator, Arthur told me, as if I hadn't figured that out already. Just then a siren started up below, making me think of Kelly again. I'd never be able to sleep in that jail, edgy as I was about everything. Arthur was getting edgy too, I guess. Several times he tried to open the window before he jumped down, but he couldn't. Making a desperate face, Arthur pulled his t-shirt up over his belly and started fanning himself. It's too hot in this place. Can't we get any air? Stacy was on her way back and heard us grumbling. Will you two shut up? Do you know how lucky we are? We're alive. And our families are alive. Maybe, I muttered. Just shut up, both of you. Arthur wasn't about to. I'm scared, you big, smart, silly man. He stumbled, suddenly giving her a shove. You don't have brains enough to be scared. There are 9 of us, remember? How are we going to live? Stacy backed off. There are going to be 10 of us soon, she said coolly. Arthur stared. It was so quiet in that women's section right then, you could have heard a cockroach sneeze. Mom is pregnant? Don't broadcast it, Stacy whispered. She doesn't want the whole world to know yet. Arthur grinned at me, everything else forgotten. Maybe we'll get a boy like Ryan. No lie, Stacy, is she really pregnant? Stacy nodded gravely. Arthur once told me their families believed babies were God's jewels. I also knew he was tired of being surrounded by females. Come on, let's push these cots together. We'll have to sleep crosswise. We had just stretched out to see if we'd fit when Mrs. Manetti came back in with trays of food. It's all I could find, she apologized to everybody. You kids will just have to pretend you're at the A&W. I wasn't going to do that. Didn't she know the A&W was in splinters like everything else on South Locust? We sat down on the floor under the window, behind the beds where it was cooler and more private. Our midnight snack, as Stacy called it, amounted to 7 graham crackers each, with 1 left over and 3 cans of cold 7-Up. I have to admit, that jail food tasted better than anything I'd ever had at the A&W. I'm needed down below, Mrs. Manetti announced before she left, so I'm turning the lights off in these bedroom units. You'll all try to get some sleep. You need it. Everyone thanked her, everyone except the baby, that is, who kept on crying, even with a graham cracker in each fist. I figured the kid must be teething like Ryan. I wonder why that tornado happened to us, Arthur said, sitting there beside me. Why didn't it hit Lincoln or Kearney or someplace in Iowa? Stacy leaned forward to brush the crumbs off of her shirt, all the time watching the lady with the baby. Arthur scooted closer. You know what? He said. What? I answered absently. I was just finishing my last cracker, wondering how long it would take Stacy to go help with that crying baby. I was feeling sorry for the poor mother myself and only halfway paying attention to Arthur when Stacy set her 7-Up down on the tray. Be back in a minute, she said. Hey, Arthur banged on my leg until I turned to him. Listen, Dan, this is important. Yeah? You know that bull roar I made? I nodded. You know what the Hopi Indians believe? My eyes were back on Stacy, and sure enough, the lady was letting her take the baby. Dan, what if I caused this tornado? He whispered in a hoarse voice. What are you talking about? The bull roar. The Hopi Indians won't let their kids play with bull roars inside. Not in the spring, leastways. You know that roaring sound they make? I nodded. That sound is supposed to bring all the whirlwind, death and destruction and all that. I knew about it, but I swung the bull roar anyway. Remember here at Goldie's place? It was ripped apart worse than anybody's. Arthur, bull roars do not cause tornadoes. He was a lot smarter than me. How could he even think that? Why us then? Grand Island, Nebraska. Excuse me. The all-American city. Why our neighborhood? There were tornadoes spinning down all over, I reminded him. He leaned back against the wall and pressed his lips together. I guess I was making him mad. I leaned back too and sucked on the edge of my 7-Up can. In spite of the heat in there, goosebumps began to finger my scalp. Was it any different what I'd been thinking? We both knew about tornadoes and storm cells and squall lines and all that. Then why had I been thinking the same way as Arthur? Only with me, it wasn't about the stupid bull roar. It was Ryan. It was all those times I wished Ryan out of existence. I'd been so sick of him from the day he was born. I squeezed my can flat with both hands, pushing the air out of my lungs at the same time. If anyone was being punished by a tornado, it was me. I was the one who had resented a helpless baby, my own flesh and blood. I wondered how I could have left and felt about that way about him. Arthur, I spoke up, determined to straighten him out. That tornado wasn't anybody's fault. Don't you think I know that? But you just said, I know what I said. He got to his feet, grinning. Come on, let's pick our spots before Stacy comes back. She's a real bad hog. Arthur took off his shoes and settled himself into one end, stretching across the 2 cots. It took me longer, pulling off waterlogged sock after the other, then rolling up in muddied bottoms of my jeans. I took my time inspecting my feet, which looked like prehistoric monsters because they were so wrinkled and gray. By the time I was ready to lie down, Arthur was breathing hard. It took all of 3 minutes for him to fall asleep. With Arthur unconscious beside me, I turned my head so I could see what was going on in the big room. The men had propped open the door and were standing near the entrance, smoking and talking in low voices. The mother in the opposite bedroom unit was washing her kids with a cloth that looked like the cuff end of Stacy's sleeve. The girl with a bandaged arm lay on one of the sofas, very still, her dark eyes open. I wondered if I'd ever seen her at the Dodge Elementary, but I didn't think I had. Stacy was now playing peekaboo with the baby, hiding behind the overstuffed chair and then popping out with these squeaky sounds that made the little kid laugh. The baby's mother had her hands full trying to get the other one to sleep. I pulled my knees up trying to get comfortable, but no matter how I arranged myself, one cut or the other stuck to the plastic. I finally gave up and closed my eyes. I couldn't think about my dad or grandpa and grandma. It made me too nervous. I concentrated on Mom and Ryan instead, wondering what they'd be doing in that big old store. Maybe the Kmart people had opened the cafeteria and were making pizza for everybody. I had a really crazy thought next. What if Kmart was doomed to be our summer home? Well, that might not be too bad. I pictured the video games and oversized toy department, the aisle of kitchen things Mom had always wanted to look at. Kmart could be a lot more interesting place to live than the Armory. Then I remembered the Armory had a basketball court, and I couldn't decide which one I liked better. I opened my eyes to check on Stacy. Why would she rather count some strange baby's toes than finish drinking her 7-Up? Wasn't she ever coming back? I finally got up and went to the bathroom. I splashed my face and arms, took a big drink, and then watched as the water pressure fell off right before my eyes. The stream reduced to a trickle and then stopped. I turned the faucet off, waited, and then tried it again, and nothing but drips. The water quit, I whispered to Stacy when I got back to the main room. The baby had fallen asleep in the big chair, and Stacy was sitting on the floor, patting its grubby-looking undershirt. She gave me a grim look, sent me to tell the two mothers, who thanked them for the bad news. After that, Stacy and I went back to our cell where she finished her drink. What does it mean when the pressure dies like that, I asked. I don't know, I guess it means we're in trouble. Even more trouble? There was plenty of water outside. It was raining again, mixed with hail. It tapped sharply against the wind, pelted the roof over our heads, what was to keep those tornadoes from coming back and flattening this center, the way they'd flattened our houses and all those big buildings on South Locust. I'll never be able to sleep, I told Stacy. Me neither, but we need to try, she said. We lay down across the cots, facing each other in the half-dark, hardly a foot between us. Having her there made me feel better, I have to admit. I figured I could spend a whole lifetime laying this way next to Stacy and not be unhappy about it. My face is really a mess, huh? She whispered. I shook my head against the plastic. Even black and blue, she looked terrific to me. Closed her eyes. When I opened mine again, Stacy was looking at me. Don't be worried, Danny. I can't help it. You know something? Mama quotes scripture when she gets upset. Says it's like taking a tranquilizer. Wish I knew some scripture, I said, which was only half true. You know, the Lord is my shepherd, don't you? Yeah, everybody knows that. Okay, so here, Dan, we have to hold hands. Anyway, this is how we do it at home. I felt kind of funny about Stacy holding my hand, which was all sweaty and hot, but then it didn't matter after all because so was hers. Now, like Mama says, you have to make a picture in your mind to go with every line that we say, or it won't work. You want to try it? I nodded. The Lord is my shepherd. She stopped there. Are you getting a picture? Yeah, I was seeing a shepherd, plain as anything. So what's he wearing? Sandals and a long robe. Does he have a cloth thing on his head? He does now. I described it for her. It was wheat colored with a red border design, something like a sweatband held in its place. Great, Danny. Stacy squeezed my hand and smiled her weird smile. We went on through the green pastures and the still waters. I saw the lambs all soft and fluffy. I heard them bleat for their mothers. We hadn't come to the valley of the shadow of death, or my cup runneth over, when all the lights in the place went out. We sat straight up. Stacy rushed to the window and jumped a few times. They're off down below, too, she said. We automatically grabbed hands when she came back. I couldn't believe it, but hers had already turned ice cold. In the big room, one of the men struck a match. The light drew the parents closer together like a magnet. In the brief flickering, we could see the girl on the sofa was sitting up too. Auxiliary power's gone, one of them said. Must have blown the generator. Dan, Stacy said, this really scares me. It doesn't scare me. I lied right through my teeth. I'm not scared at all, Dan said. I held her hand tight, marveling that it was exactly the same size as mine, and squeezed my eyes shut against the terrifying dark. I started in again on the 23rd palm, only to myself this time. Funny how that shepherd, who sure enough had Jesus' face to start with, was looking more and more like my own dad. The next thing I knew, I was being jolted awake by the thundering roar of helicopters going right over our head. Alrighty, and that is where we will start next time. I hope y'all are doing well, and have a good night. Bye, guys.